Hey, welcome back to Driver 88. And generally when I think Bentley, I think Continental, and it's one of the oldest nameplates you can find on the road today, going back all the way to 1952. What we haven't had on the channel yet is a Continental GT, and this is the car that a lot of people are tempted to look at as a really good used bargain. It doesn't come without its potential risks though. So we found a second gen, 10-year-old Continental GT in really good spec and condition. We're going to look at whether it's potentially worth buying one today, talk to our mechanic, take it for a drive, and have a look at what is the most common Bentley nameplate for sale today. It's the Continental GT V8. This is a now almost 10-year-old Bentley Continental GT. Now, this being the V8 means it's the second generation, and it's also a facelift, given that it's post 2015. I think it's aged particularly well, very much from the side profile and the rear. I think most people who weren't super into cars wouldn't know how old it is. Maybe the circular lights haven't aged as well as they could have, but I particularly like with this facelift and the extra chrome grille, it just really bounces off well against the white. Now, the wheels, of course, we've got all-wheel drive, 275s on the rear. This car really is a super grand tourer, called Continental originally due to the fact that people would drive this across continental Europe. In this case, it's down under, so you've got plenty of space to do grand touring in this car. Slightly different body looks to the original Continental GT, and of course, as of 2019, we've got two more generations after this. Some would say that this looks better than even the new ones. I'm kind of mixed though. Really good looking car overall. Now, it's not the W12, but with the introduction of the V8 to the Continental GT, the EA824 is a really well-rounded engine, 500 horsepower, 660 Newton meters. Most important about that 660 Newton meters is that it comes from almost idle, just 1700 RPM. This car has huge legs, 309 kilometers per hour, as you'd kind of expect, I guess, from a Super GT. Performance against the W12 6-litre twin turbo is actually very similar. So both being a base car, your 0 to 100 times is about 4.6 seconds. Quarter mile, maybe mid 12s if you could get on a good surface, is pretty much on par with the W12. Fuel consumption, of course, is far lower than the W12. I've seen that Bentley claims somewhere around the 9 litres per 100. We'll see if we can manage that. I don't think you could that well, but why would you even bother when you're spending this much on a Bentley? The ZF 8-speed is quite a step on from the previous generation Continental GTs. 6-speed ZF, just more efficiency, far smoother. And also this engine really is still seen today in cars like the Panamera, even the Lamborghini Urus and the upcoming Lamborghini Temerario will use a base version of this engine, and then of course with extended performance and different turbos and things. So a really well-rounded V8 engine. Now, there's no doubt with this key that you can tell that it has VW underpinnings, but it does feel a lot heavier and nicer with the lovely badge. It's interesting to compare the key of this to a couple of Rolls Royces we had not long ago from the older vintages. This feels far more premium and for a lot less cost. Now, when it comes to the interior, everything is particularly heavy in its touch and feel. The doors are incredibly heavy, and all your switchgear just feels that VW+++. Particularly what I like is the action on the ZF 8-speed paddles. Really nice feel and touch from the aluminum. Some might say that the central screen is the only thing in here that's kind of aged, but it's really enclosed by some of the nicest leather and some of the nicest knurled points that you could ever touch in a car. Now, this car, of course, being a 2+2, you've got rear seats, and I'll see how I go for headroom. I think I might struggle, but you could definitely fit at least maybe another suitcase or some smaller people or children in the back. Oh. Yeah. Okay, so my head's hitting the roof, but I'm 180 centimeters. I've got a kind of a long body, but this contoured rear seat is actually quite comfortable. Maybe for a smaller person, you'd be pretty happy back here, but not for a particularly long journey. Now the boot is relatively spacious. You've got to understand also that this is an all-wheel drive car, so we don't have as much space as some others, but quite cavernous. It goes really far back. You could easily fit, I think, 2 full-size suitcases which would be enough for, of course, grand touring with a significant other, which I think this car is all about. Now, one of the main reasons why I think, of course, you would look at a used Bentley Continental GT is, of course, the depreciation. Now, this car came out at $439,000 before options, before things like reversing camera and extra leather, carbon, etc. If you were to put that into an inflation calculator today, you're looking at more like $560,000. Today, this one's asking about 180 grand before on-road taxes. And given the cost of ownership, you definitely want to put some money aside if you're looking at a Continental GT for your servicing and maintenance, all that sort of stuff. There's definitely some horror stories with examples that are not treated well, and there's definitely a lot of them I see in sort of Europe and the UK. This one's got particularly low miles, but to get a bit of a better idea about servicing and maintenance, we're going to talk to our friend Ray at Ray's Eurotech to see what some of those costs are. So we're here at Ray's Eurotech. Now Ray looks after our own personal cars, and we're going to ask him about the second-gen Continental GT. What sort of stuff should we look out for if we're looking at used? In this case, our car was almost 10 years old. What should we look out for if you're looking to buy a used car?
G'day Nick, and g'day everyone. So second generation of Bentleys are a lot better than the first generation. They're fairly new for any like specific issues, but at this stage, so far 10 years, they've been spot on. So there's not many issues. In terms of like the first
W12
generation one, yeah, they had like a lot of vacuum, coolant leak, turbo oil leaks, this and that. Anything you touch on that car was a big job. So if you do fix one vacuum hose, you may have to remove the whole motor.
Okay.
So yeah, so it was a bit of fun. Yeah.
Suspension can go on the first
suspension,
gen as well,
suspension as well. So suspension is pretty common on any other car. So like the fairly heavy cars. So the suspension, like air suspension, can go wrong on any other car. But yeah, they do have a common issues. Yeah. Suspension and the water ingress on a lot of the electrical control units and stuff. So yeah.
So what about the, so this V8 twin turbo, it's in a number of other Porsche, Audi, Lamborghini.
Yeah, same setup as RS7 Quattro or RS6, same platform. So using the same driveline, ZF gearbox and the Quattro's sports diff and stuff. So the common issues we've found so far on a VAS group is just the coolant leak from the water pump and nothing else really, like just pretty much bulletproof. Basically, it's just a coolant leak. I would suggest you just make sure that there's no coolant leak.
Make sure it's been serviced properly as well.
Obviously. Any car you buy, make sure you have a good service history and the correct kilometers as well.
And the ZF gearbox is pretty solid,
right? Oh, the gearbox is pretty solid, and it has been tested. We personally, we put at least 1300 Newton meter torque on it, wouldn't budge, yeah. So it's pretty strong gearbox, yeah. The same, the Quattro diff has been tested on an RS7 with the stage 2, so APR, so being
making a lot more
full
power.
On, making a lot of power, yeah. So
awesome. All right, thanks for the insight, Ray.
No, thanks, mate.
So in driving the Bentley Continental GT sedately, the first thing that comes to my mind is how nice it is to have an analog clock in front of me and analog dials. It just perfectly places itself with where a Bentley should be, and we don't need all these screens that we have in modern cars. Maybe one small screen for GPS and music, but that's about it. I really would prefer to have more dials in modern cars. Now, one thing that's kind of stuck out to me is the visibility is kind of not as good as I expected it to be. It's certainly not as good as a modern Rolls-Royce. You've got a really raked front and rear screen, and yeah, you're kind of having to double check when you're changing lanes, because this is obviously quite a large car. Now, when it comes to comfort though, everything is in the right place. All your leather touch points feel fantastic. All your buttons, even though there's sort of an inkling that it can be said that it comes from a Volkswagen, still feel really premium, particularly this wheel here used on the steering wheel, the paddles, as I said before, and all the leather appointments. These seats are fantastic. They're kind of sporty, but they also have enough of a contour in them to be comfortable. Now when it comes to performance, we've got a lovely burble coming from the V8 twin turbo 4-litre engine. Very, very smooth. The ZF 8-speed is a really, really perfect marriage with that engine. Drops down relatively quickly. You don't need to be in a particularly sporty mode to get a solid amount of performance. And when I sit in this car, I kind of think, firstly, how well it has kept up for a 10-year-old car, and how much I kind of don't miss having a super modern interior with 4 screens across. I'd much rather this bright work and potentially timber in some other models. Now, when we change this car into sport mode, it really transforms, and I feel like given we're 2.3 tons, it's got really, really good performance. It picks up really, really well. Definitely confidence inspiring. The steering wheel and steering gets a little bit sharper, but it doesn't make it feel particularly better because you've got a bit of a huge front end to place. This car, of course, is for grand touring, for going high speeds and maintaining them for a long time. You know, I was thinking about what cars you would potentially cross shop against a very expensive, heavily depreciated V8 Grand Tourer, and you'd probably be looking at the other big 3 German brands, like maybe, I don't know, an M8, an M6. I certainly think that a Rolls-Royce Wraith is just not in the same sort of category given how sporty this is to drive. So in a way, it's in its own sort of place, and I think that that makes it even more appealing. Looking at the interior, the exterior, it's always funny to me that the cost of this car is less today than a brand new M3. This one has just 15,000 kilometers on it. For insurance, I'm sure you'll be paying a fair bit more money than a new M3 though. So, a second gen V8, now 10 years old. Are you crazy enough to look at purchasing one of these? I think that if you get a good example, you're certainly going to get a lot of car for your money. You're also definitely going to need to put away some money for servicing, insurance, and potential maintenance. What I do think is interesting about this car is I feel like it has aged a fair bit better than the first generation Continental GT. This car was made for about 4 years, and generally this model is the most popular one for sale. So you've got a bit more choice on offer when you're looking on the used market. What I certainly wouldn't do is purchase one without giving it a proper, thorough investigation, because as you'll see on the internet, all sorts of things can potentially go wrong, but if you've got a good example, you can have many, many miles of grand touring and performance ahead of you. So this is Driver 88, and I'll see you next time.